One that's probably going through a lot of people's minds, especially investors, it's houses versus units to see which one we should be investing in.
Of course, that strategy changes whether you're buying a home to live in or investing. A lot of that comes down, of course, to affordability and location, which has a lot to do with the affordability and things. But I'm looking really forward to unpacking all that.
Since you're the expert, let's get into it and see if we can help some people out there.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
All right, good morning, Lloyd. Welcome back to the studio. We've got a fabulous new studio today for our podcast.
Looking very forward to it, Armando. Yeah, we've got all the mod cons here, doing something a little bit different, nice and cozy. So really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I think we've got a good podcast to talk about today too. One that's probably going through a lot of people's minds, especially investors. It's houses versus units to see which one we should be investing in.
Well, absolutely. And of course, that strategy changes whether you're buying a home to live in or investing. But today's topic is really about investing, which one you should invest in.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of that comes down, of course, to affordability and location, which has a lot to do with the affordability and things. But yeah, I'm looking really forward to unpacking all that.
Yeah, I think that's the big issue, especially if you're living in Sydney or Melbourne and you're trying to buy a house. You know, we're talking houses, you know, million dollars plus. When we're talking units, you can talk from 500,000 to whatever you like. So I think it is a good topic we should cover. Ask the questions. You're the expert, so let's get into it and see if we can help some people out there.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
All right. So I've written down a couple of questions, so I thought we should go into tenancies and vacancies. Like we're looking at investors. They're obviously looking at renting these homes. Is there any pluses and minuses for a unit versus a house?
Well, I really think the biggest thing that you need to consider when looking at any investment property is the vacancy rates in the area. So if you're into a good suburb and it's got low vacancy rates, a couple of years ago, probably about 3% was considered to be equilibrium.
Mm-hmm.
But now, with the tight rental markets around the country, probably anything below 2%, we're often buying sort of around 1% or under. Is where vacancy rates are. So that's probably the first thing to look at. You don't want to be buying in a suburb that has 5 or 6% vacancy. I guess the thing to consider though, when it comes houses versus units, is that if you are buying into a large unit complex that might have 100 apartments or so, you're likely to have more that might be vacant at any one time. So you may actually have 3 or 4 units in that one complex that is vacant, which would be a little bit different than if you're buying, say, a house in an area where there may not be any vacant houses. True. In that street.
True. And do you think they should take into account that right now we've got a shortage of rentals in general? So obviously the vacancy rates for rent for houses and units is quite low. Should they look a little bit further into the future? Think, will those numbers sort of stay the same, or do you think it'll claw back a bit and that will become more important?
Definitely need to look at what's potentially going to happen in the future. Well, no one's got a crystal ball. I think it is important to really look at what the trend is and what the data is showing. Population to the area and the type of demographics that are moving there. Because while you're buying investment property, you need to think of who's going to be renting it, and are these young couples, singles, young families potentially, and really make sure that you're buying the right property for the demographic in that area.
Right. Probably leads us to our next question. So what about oversupply? So we're seeing a lot of that with units at the moment where there's a lot of units that have been built. There is a bit of a slowdown now, but is oversupply going to be an issue too? And should that be taken into account when you're investing?
Yeah, look, oversupply always needs to be taken into account. So supply and demand all the time. I think, again, it comes down to buying into large apartment complexes that have a lot of properties there. Because if you're buying where there's too many properties available, then there's too much supply, there's too much choice for buyers. So that's actually going to put downward pressure on prices and actually downward pressure on rent as well. So if you do get into buying a unit, my advice would be to buy a more boutique type property. So something that there may be only 15 or 20 units, and maybe an older style, maybe an Art Deco apartment building or something, rather than a new Meriton style apartment building that might have 150, 200 units in it, because that is when there will be actually more vacancy at the time.
So when you mean boutique, you're talking about a unit with maybe 10 or less in that. Should it have some sort of unique character about it? Should it be near the water? Should it be near public transport? Are those little things important as well when we're looking at units?
Yeah, always. So I think the same thing applies to any type of investment property. So whether you're buying a unit, whether you're buying a house, I always like to look for properties essentially in a really good street. So it doesn't necessarily have to be near the water if you're not buying in a city that's near the water. Mm-hmm. So that can be one such instance to look at. But just a general street, locations, a nice quiet street, in the catchment zone of some good local schools, near the shops and amenities, ease of access to transport, so that might be trains, buses, whatever's good for the area. So that's always very important. And if you are buying a unit, then make sure that is well located like that.
Very, very good advice. And probably the biggest pitfall here, I think, that everyone sometimes can overlook is strata levies and what can happen. So this is a big question.
So I think one of the things about strata is that people look at the yield on a unit, and the yields are often a little bit higher on units than what they might be on houses. However, once you take into account the strata levies, then that can actually bring the yield down. So the net rent on a property is probably not as high as what it would initially look like as a gross rent. But the biggest issue I find is potentially what can happen to a property where you might end up paying special levies, which would be a percentage of the whole complex, depending on how much unit entitlement you've got. But examples of that might be if there's concrete cancer in the building, or if there's some boundaries that need repairing and things like that. I've experienced that in one of my own units, in fact.
How did that go?
Well, not great. I ended up, selling the property, but it, of course, had that special levies hanging over it, which meant that I had to discount the sales price of it, so the new buyer could take that into account. But the problem with that is that although there's nothing wrong with your own apartment, and in that case my own apartment didn't have any issues with it, because the building did, then every person in the building who owns part of that strata, they have to actually pay part of the special levies. So that can really put a dent into your cash flow if that occurs. You don't really get that, if you own a house, because if you own a house, there might be issues in the house, but you own the whole house, and any repairs you might get done by insurance, and you can cover things yourself. But if it's in your house, then I guess you are responsible for that. But in an apartment building, even if there's nothing wrong with your own apartment, you've still got to come up with some of those.
And they can be quite high, some of them, can't they?
Oh, they can be, because you get quotes, and they could be $500,000, $2 million for repairs. Now, you might only have to pay a percentage of that, but your percentage of that might still be $50,000, $80,000, which is quite significant when you've got an investment that you're trying to make some money on.
Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest pitfalls about buying a unit, though, isn't it?
Yeah, potentially. I think it is. That, along with the fact that overall, I think the growth on a unit in terms of investment perspective is generally not as high as they are on houses. And I think that might bring us to the next perspective there about, if you've got a certain budget, should you be buying a house in a capital city, or should I say, should you be buying a unit in a capital city, or should you be looking for a further out suburb or a regional type market to buy a house?
Right. So that what you're doing is saying, should I be buying one? Let's use Sydney for an example. Should I be buying a unit in Sydney, or should I be buying a regional property somewhere else with some land? And that's probably the comparison people need to start looking at. Instead of buying so close to themselves, should they just be reaching a little further to possibly get themselves in a home that may not be Sydney?
That's correct. Now, there's a couple of caveats on that. There are some areas that have really well located units that could do very well. So if you're buying near the water, so for me, if it's right on the beach at Cronulla, or if it's on, say, DY on the northern beaches or something, then they've got a history of good capital growth and things, those kind of markets. So buying a unit in those areas can do quite well, because the units are going to be a fair bit more expensive as well. Getting back to the strata thing is that if you are buying a unit, then you need to make sure you get a strata report to see if there has been any special levies that have occurred in the past, and just check on the state of the building, and just do your normal checks, of course, to make sure you're comfortable with that. But in general, if people do have a little bit of a budget, then I would be looking at buying maybe a house in a further out suburb, or in a regional market. Right. Because the thing about getting a house is that you've got land, you've got land value there. You can actually do things with the land, because, as people know, land appreciates and buildings depreciate. So over time, if you've got a house and it gets really old, you knock that house down, you can rebuild it, you can develop it. Having a house on land does have potential in other ways, depending on what you buy and the council in the area. But you might be able to put a granny flat on there. You might be able to do an extension subject to council approval. You might be able to build a duplex, all those sort of things. You can't do any of that if you're just buying an apartment in an apartment building.
So the value add that you talk about in your book, to say, well, how are we going to add value add? It seems to be harder to do that to a unit than it is to a house. So you've gone through all those scenarios just now where you go, okay, we bought the home, we can add the granny flat, we can renovate it, where we're really restricted with a unit of what we can do. So it's probably a tick in the box to buy a house at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I think so. And of course, it's just something to really, really weigh up, because some people might want to, really own a unit in a certain market. They just really need to think about whether that's going to be right for them, or whether they should get a house in a further out market that might be able to do something with. But as I mentioned in Positively Geared, that those value add opportunities are important, and they're easier to do when you've got a house. Because the other thing that, although if you buy a unit, the value add opportunities they're still there. Like, you can do a renovation on the property and things like that. However, often you need to get approval from the strata body to see if you can actually get that to happen, because you might need to get strata permission to put in an air conditioner or to even put new floors in and things like that. And you often can't change the balcony or anything like that if you want a better looking balcony without strata changing everybody's balcony. So there's a few restrictions as well.
So if they've bought the unit, because some of our listeners out there might already have that unit, so they do need to add some value to it, what are you suggesting they do to it?
Well, the basic value adds, same as what you do with a house. So for me, that would be paintwork inside, floor coverings, if that's permissible under the strata bylaws, and also window coverings. Again, window coverings that probably need to be similar to window coverings that other units have within the building and things. And of course, upgrading the kitchen and the bathroom. Installing new appliances and things like that. So there's plenty of value adds that people can do. So it's not all bad if you own a unit. And certainly, often people will buy a unit because they've got a smaller budget. And even people that have a significantly smaller budget and maybe can't afford a house in a regional area might also look at a unit in a regional area as well. So they're not that bad doing that. Today's conversation is about which should you do if you can afford both in different areas. But it's not all bad for people who have a unit and they can do a few things for some value adds as well.
And I think a lot of people get into the market, and this probably happens a lot. They're living with mum and dad at the moment. Mum and dad are pushing them to say, let's go and buy something. And of course, mum and dad want them close by. So they sort of tend to lean them to say, let's go look at a unit because you're a first time investor or still living at home. And they seem to drift into buying a unit close to mum and dad. Do you think that's probably the best thing to do?
It's probably not the best thing to do. So something they can certainly look at, but I still think people should look further abroad, when I say abroad, I don't mean overseas, but certainly further away from
the nest,
from the nest. So and that might mean, like, if people are not familiar with areas outside of where they live, get some assistance. I mean, there are plenty of buyers agents around who, would be locals in a particular area. So people can do their research and then look at where's more affordable. And like, if someone lives in Sydney, they'll find that it's actually affordable in comparison to buy something in Brisbane or to buy something in Adelaide, and to seek some local help potentially there. So I think definitely looking further afield. To see what they can.
You touched on it briefly there. A lot of time, in my experience as well, it's actually mum and dad that come through the open homes first, make a short list of the property you should buy, then bring their child around. Where probably you need to send mum and dad, if you are, a bit further abroad, and that's probably the problem. And probably that's where someone like you comes in as well. Say, well, get someone else in to help you look at those suburbs that are further abroad that you can't get to on a Saturday.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think, mum and dads are going to be generally trying to find something close to where they live, and it's probably normal for as parents that you want your
kids close by.
Kids to be fairly close by, so you'd be looking to get them something there. That has its own inherent problem, which you might see a little bit as an agent, but I certainly see when I'm bidding at auctions, are that a lot of those properties that are in the first home buyer demographic, which are generally units and townhouses, tend to go for a lot more than, certainly a lot more than the price guide, but certainly more than what we might be expecting they go for. And often that's because some of the young people buying those properties have the help of the bank of mum and dad. So you can still be priced out because you've got some people with deeper pockets that will just pay a little bit more and usually have the help of their parents. So again, just looking a little bit further afield would be beneficial there. And I think this comes comes back to a topic I guess we've talked about before about rentvesting as well.
Yeah, yeah.
Just buy a property where you can afford to get on the property ladder in an area that makes sense from capital growth, but also from the rental yields perspective. Because if you buy regionally or in another state, you get higher yields than you might do in where you live, particularly if you live in, say, Sydney or Melbourne. So that's worth thinking about. And then you can continue to rent. Now, if your parents don't want you at home, then you can move out and just rent a house. But live where you want to live where you need to live, close to work and things, close to the beach, or all those things that you love to do that maybe you can't afford to do when you're a young person, and just get on the property ladder somewhere else.
Yeah. So it's a strategy. I think that's what a lot of people miss at the end. You've got to have a strategy with investing in property, and that's the big key that I learned from reading your books and seeing with my customers who have bought properties. A lot of them didn't really have this strategy of what they're doing with their money. So they've either, their accountants come and said, hey, you need to buy an investment property, and they just went and bought something with not actually thinking about it. Where what you're suggesting is, okay, don't just go out and maybe buy that unit close to mum and dad. Look further abroad. Look for something that's got some land, so then you can make some capital growth.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a strategy, and as I've mentioned in both my books, Positively Geared and Buy Now, it's there's so many things to strategy, right? So strategy might be buying a house where you can add some value. It could be buying a dual income property, could be adding a granny flat, but the strategy is also rentvesting. That is a strategy. So sometimes people overthink the whole thing about strategy, and we're like, when people come to us, we map out a strategy. We work with them on what they want to achieve over the next 5 to 10 years and what sort of properties might help them to be able to get there. But often people overthink what that actually is. And at the end of the day, a strategy is just the type of property that you need to buy to help you get to the next step. And for some people, that is as simple as just buying something that's affordable in the right location that should perform well for them. No one's got a crystal ball, but you can just do the best you can in trying to find something that'll perform well.
Okay, and that sort of leads them into the next part of their strategy if they've got a 5-year plan. So what do you think the biggest thing people overthink? You did mention that, yeah.
Yeah, like people overthink. I think people have a sort of a 10 or a 15-year goal, and then they want a whole strategy mapped out for that. But that's really hard to do because no one's got a crystal ball. So you can't really sit there and say, okay, you're going to buy this property in this location now, and then you're going to get this much capital growth and this much yield. You're going to buy Melbourne next, and then you're going to buy Brisbane next, and you're going to get this much capital growth. Then you're going to build a duplex, and then you're going to do this, and then you're going to sell this property because it's had this much growth. And people start to overthink things. Whereas what's more important is that you should keep adding to that strategy over time. Once you see how your finances are going, once you see how the market is going. But the most important thing is actually getting on to the property ladder. So thinking about what works for you first. So looking at your budget. Now, if you've got a budget of, say, $800,000, then that's not going to get you a house in Sydney. That may get you a small unit in some suburbs, but otherwise go somewhere else where you can actually buy a house. And for that budget, you can buy a house in some areas of Brisbane, some areas of Adelaide, and maybe you would spend less than that to help your borrowing capacity moving forward. And part of that strategy would be, okay, how much should you spend on that first property, the type of property, the yield, and of course then looking at the best entity to buy in, getting advice from your accountant and financial advisors around should you buy in your own name, should you buy in a trust, etc. And setting yourself up from there. And then just getting out there, getting that first property, and then revisiting that a month later and seeing how that's going, and then looking at what might come next when you're ready for your next purchase.
Okay, so if we're just going to recap on units versus houses, it sounds like you're saying buy the house. You're saying steer clear of the unit. Is that, you think that's your advice?
Yeah, to an extent. I wouldn't say 100% so, because I do think that people need to get on to the property ladder. So, if people do have a fairly low budget, and these days with property prices increasing, it's getting hard to sort of buy a house even sort of under the 500,000 mark in a lot of areas, but you can buy units. So I think that people need to do a lot of research and make sure they're buying the right sort of property if they're buying a unit, but potentially there's an in-between one as well, and that's buying that townhouse. If you're buying a townhouse or a villa, it's just a little bit bigger. They usually have lower strata. Some townhouses even have they're on Torrens title, so they won't have strata, and you get a little bit of a bigger plot.
And you get some land with it.
you get a bit of land, and they're often in smaller complexes. So that's something to look at as well. So it's in between. Now, for some people, they've really got their mind on that they don't want to buy in a regional market, and that's understandable. Like I've seen some really excellent results from buying in regional markets from growth, as long as you're picking the right one that has, all the industry or the growth drivers. Essentially, like it's really important to to buy an area that has things like education, retail, manufacturing, education, healthcare, all those sort of factors, so that the growth is sort of underpinned.
Yeah.
However, for some people, they still think, that it's going to be safer to buy in a capital city. So, if people do have a budget and they can't afford to buy a house in a capital city, but they also don't want to buy regionally, maybe buying a unit in a capital city would be okay, but you just need to think of the location. So a smaller boutique complex, make sure it's well located. A couple of areas to note in terms of places to be careful of. Brisbane City Council released way too many developments approvals, probably going back about 10 years, and took a long time to catch up. So there's a massive oversupply there, and we're now seeing in the last couple of years that the apartments have started to get some growth there. But for many years there was just like stagnant, sort of no growth. There's just no growth properties, and we're seeing the same in Melbourne at the moment. In a lot of those inner city Melbourne markets where there's just no growth, so you can still buy units very cheaply. Essentially, so
we might cover that in another podcast as well, and we talk about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's something to be a little bit careful of in terms of where you buy that unit. So if you are going to buy a unit in a capital city, you really need to think of the location and then look at the history of the growth, in that market.
So if they're doing their research, how are they going to look for the history of that market? What should they do to do that?
Yeah. So I think getting access to software like RP Data, Price Finder. There's a couple of examples there. A lot of that data can be found on the internet. You don't need to have a professional subscription. A lot of buyers agents and people who work in property will have professional subscriptions. Even if you're working with a mortgage broker, they usually have a subscription, and they can spit out more detail.
And see what it sold for 3-5 years ago.
Yeah, that's right.
And try and track it.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's sort of important from that. It's not just the growth in that market, but it's also the growth of that property. So you need to look at units versus houses in that suburb, because you might have a suburb that's shown good growth, but then when you dig deeper, it's actually houses that have shown good growth, but units have not done much. So you really need to look deeper to see at the property you're buying or you're looking to buy if that's really got the growth in there.
So Lloyd, 3 quick points. What advice would you give for them looking for units versus houses? Can you just cover those quickly?
Well, research.
Research?
Yeah, absolute research.
Number one?
There. So number one would be research to really look at houses versus units and the best capital growth in those markets. Due diligence is really important on any property. But if you are buying like a unit, then you really need to look at the the strata reports and to see if any work has been needed on that property in the past, and also to see what sort of funds are in the sinking fund, essentially. So there's a bit of money in the body corporate. It's really important. And you also need to look at your net yield, because the gross yield on units are going to look stronger than houses, but when you do your net yield, they're often not as strong.
So you got to incorporate all your fees there. Third and final quote, check all your fees that are in that come through for your units, over your strata rates, your council rates, any special levies.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Now, there's one thing to note there is that when you look at the your strata rates, that actually covers the insurance on your unit. Whereas when you have a house, you've got to have insurance
your own
on
insurance,
your house. However, often the strata costs on your unit do outweigh what you might be paying insurance on a house. So that's where you've got to be careful to really analyse those numbers and look at that data carefully.
All right. Thank you, Lloyd. Well, that brings us to our fun part of the segment. So as you know, we've started a new game called Ed's Deal. So I've got 3 properties for us to look at. Well, mainly you to look at and tell us if they're a good deal or bad deal. Now, you haven't actually seen these yet. So let's go through them. And I thought they might relate a little bit to our topic today. So the first one I've got is in Emerson Road, Dapto. It is a 3-bedroom house, 1 bathroom. It's on quite a large block of land. I'm just looking for it now. It looks like to be in about 550 squares. It's a brick home. That's that one there. You might want to have a look.
Yep.
Now that sort of leads into our talk today. So that's outside Sydney. If anyone doesn't know where Dapto is, it's outside. It's a regional suburb.
Down south.
Down south.
Yep.
What do you think?
Drive past it all the time when I'm going to my holiday home down the south coast.
There you go. Okay.
I don't know whether I drive past this house all the time.
Yeah.
But my first thoughts on this is that it doesn't actually have any parking.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really important that you do have parking. Now again, it does depend on the area, because there are some regional locations that you might buy in that will have off-street parking, will have suitable areas that maybe a value add might be to add a garage or add some undercover parking. So it's not always a deal breaker. In this case, and on this particular road, I actually know where this property is. Yeah. It's there's not really any room to add much parking there.
Okay.
So I think that's going to be probably hurt the long-term growth and long-term yield, because it's going to probably there's going to be a lot of potential tenants that might be turned away because they can't park the car anywhere on this property. And when you're looking at the size of that block and you look to develop it, it's actually a little bit small to actually do anything much with that block. So it's not a great value add opportunity either. Right.
So it's maybe a no deal, that one, unless you can put a driveway in.
I think that's probably a no deal. It's got a footpath there, but I think you need more than a footpath.
You need more than a footpath. Yeah. All right. Our second one is we've got a 1-bedroom unit, because it's in a good price range. It's 94 square metres. It's in Belmore. The guide price is $490 to $520. It's got parking with it. Rental yield would probably be still quite good there. A lot of changes going through Belmore at the moment as well. So I thought I'd throw that one in since we've talked about units versus houses.
Well, I used to live in Belmore many years ago.
There you go.
And a few other suburbs around there. So for me, this property is probably a no, because it's a unit in a capital city, and at a price guide of $490 to $520, so probably around that 500 mark. That's where you can go to a regional market and just buy a block of land with a house on it, and probably get some more growth and do some value adds in those areas. There's a number of regional areas that.
Funny you would say that, Lloyd, because my next one I've got here is 540 to 580, and it is a regional suburb of Bathurst.
Yep.
Right? That's what you're talking about, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. So Bathurst is an area that is getting some solid growth there. And this property looks like it's got a little bit more room to add value. So the ad says it's sort of renovated and ready, but I look at that, and from the outset, I think we could probably do some work on the facade and the windows and some landscaping, so you can add some more street appeal on that property to assist with that. In terms of where prices are in Bathurst at the moment, that property is probably quite well priced, but there's one thing that I'd be very careful of there, is that there's no parking there, and it's a 4-bedroom house. Mm-hmm. So that in itself is a little bit of an issue there. But with the with the location of this particular property, I'd be a little bit careful of that too, because Harrick Street is a fairly busy street as well. So that's probably a maybe, but we'll probably need a little bit of work there, because there's also a big tree sort of overhanging the house as well. So a few things to look at there. So that's potentially a property, but that would take further investigation to see if we want to proceed with it. The unit in Belmore would be a no, because I think a 1-bedroom unit particularly doesn't get a lot of growth these days, because people, particularly now working from home, like to have a little bit more room to set up home office. So I think if you're going to buy a unit, you're probably looking for at least sort of 2 to 3 bedroom units anyway, to get some sort of solid growth anyway. So I'd sort of say no to that one.
Yeah, and they're good comparables to see between regional and cities. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, you can see and get some good value if you head out west.
They're all different locations, because you've got you've got Dapto, which is sort of down south, and it's a pretty good area there. You've got Bathurst, which is very regional, and you've got something in the city as well, similar price points.
All right, that brings us to the end of today's podcast. Thanks, Lloyd. It's very informative. Looking forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Chat to you soon. Hey, guys. Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Positively Geared. If you enjoyed it, please read my books, Positively Geared and Buy Now. They're available at all good bookshops and even some bad ones. And I'd love you to jump onto our website, ozpropertyprofessionals.com.au, and say good day. Bye for now, and thanks for listening.